How's it crack, everyone? It is Nathan here, aka the Rambling Kern, and head instructor of Kern School of Combat. So, coming to you today with a new video on what is correct to say a item of clothing that the Kern would have worn, but more importantly, this is probably the longest running piece of clothing that I will cover. Excuse the pun. This is one that was one of the earliest forms of clothing of its kind found in Ireland, and very closely resembles one of the earliest forms of clothing ever found of its kind. And without further ado, that is the Pampootie. So you would have seen this in my previous hiking video across Glenmalure, and you will see plenty more of these. I'd also recommend checking out Tom Langhorn, aka Fandabidozis video on these as well, as he's made a few examples. I do plan on making a few more. One interesting thing about these is that at the time these were made because they were cheap, plentiful and easy to make, whereas now leather and hide are no longer cheap and easy materials to get hold of. So while they are cheap and easy to make in some regards, in other regards for us modern folks, they are not as cheap as they would have been at the time. But anyway, basically this is a single piece of leather folded over, one stitch up the front, one stitch up the back, and two laces, one at the front here and one at the back. There's a few different variations on the design, but that's generally how it works. So this is made by my friend Dave, aka Meerkat. So as you can see, very simple design, stitch here, stitch there, and one single piece of leather, and our straps here and straps there. So these generally get tied around the ankle, and this generally just locks up the front to keep your foot in place. Surprisingly comfortable, very effective piece of clothing. And like I say, probably the longest running piece of clothing that I will cover ever, really. So there is an example very similar to these that date back to, I believe, Bronze Age, from within Ireland. But anyway, I'll put up the details on screen as I show it. And there is also an example that looks remarkably like them, which is the earliest found shoe in human history, which dates from 3500 BC, found in Armenia. Almost the exact same construction, exact same design. But more interestingly, that design of shoe and the Pampootie in general was worn all the way up until the early to mid 1900s in our islands. And I'll bring up some pictures of that as well so you can see. And the example that I have here are actually based on those pictures. And again, a really simplistic design, generally made by the person, usually made with the basically the buttock part of the hide, because it's generally thicker and quite supple. My example here, I've gotten a little bit dried out, mainly due to just lack of wear. Generally these stay supple from continuous wear, and were generally made as a kind of throwaway piece of clothing that you'd wear them out. Quite commonly you'd see the pads start to wear through, just on the balls of your foot, and then you throw them away and replace them, as is very common with that style of shoe and kind of shoes throughout the medieval period. Quite often the soles of the shoes were simply removed. So for example, my early medieval pair of shoes that I have here is actually a classic example of it. So the upper of this shoe is about 15 or 16 years old, so kind of classic traditional medieval style ankle boot, whereas the sole itself is about 5 years old, which was replaced by a shoemaker in Dublin. Very, very common with these. I know there is in Woodkey in Dublin, there was actually a number of heels found. So basically obviously a shoemaker takes a piece off, throws it in the corner, puts on a new one, and away you go. Whereas the Pampootie was much more an everyman's shoe, one that anyone could make themselves, and as a result it was one that in areas where people needed to do that, it continued for quite some time. So you'll see a lot of similarities in a lot of indigenous societies and cultures with their footwear. The moccasin in North America, I think, is a very good example of a shoe that is very similar in design and concept to these. But it's just a very fascinating piece of history, that they were worn for at least 1,000 years that we know of, and probably even further back. And I mean, if you see from the example I've shown from Armenia, I mean, you're talking almost 4,000 years old of a shoe. Very simple, very effective design. There were many of these were actually left with the hide on, and the hide was left on the outside to give additional grip, not on the inside. So even with these ones, you'll see the inner grain, which is basically the inside of the skin, is left on the inside of the shoe, and the outside is left on the outside. That would have been the same with the hide, except obviously you have hair on it to give you that extra bit of traction, especially on wet and boggy ground. So fascinating item. Like I say, this one within Ireland, we know for sure, was used for almost 1,000 years, perhaps even longer. And I think with the sort of terrain that we have, from my own experiences with them, these are a fantastic shoe to have, because you can literally roll them up and shove them in your pocket and go barefoot if the ground's not really appropriate for them. Or if you're walking on kind of sharp stone or something like that, you can put them on real quick and away you go. And the nice thing about them is they're very quick to replace and quick to make, should you need to make yourself a new pair. I hope to, in the coming months, do a video on making a pair for myself. I just need to get hold of some hide in order to do that. So if you're interested in that, please give the channel a like and subscribe. It really is helping out. We're closing in on that 1,000 mark, which is a really big milestone, and I really appreciate everyone's support getting to here. If you have any questions about the Pampootie, do let me know. Before anyone asks, we don't know where the name originates from. I've tried to research this online. There's no real Irish words that reflect it. So if anyone knows of the origin of the term, or at least what they think it might be, please do let me know. I did read that there's some references to the Turkish pampoosh, I believe it's called, kind of Turkish slipper. I know some of my friends have called these my Aladdin slippers, because they look kind of like Aladdin slippers with the kind of pointy end on them. But yeah, if anyone has any more information on that, I would really appreciate it. I'm always learning, always trying to figure these things out. And once again, thank you for watching, and slán.